So good morning, everyone. Each October, we gather together to acknowledge Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And this year, as we kick off a month of a brighter day, I'm heartened to see a diversity of stakeholders here, unified by the common mission of ending domestic violence and advocating for survivors. I want to acknowledge the elected officials and law enforcement partners and community leaders who are in attendance today. Dr. Gail Patton, the CEO of Hubbard House, Ellen Seiler of Quigley House, Tracy Fazell, Micah's Place, Kelly Franklin, and Betty Griffin of the Betty Griffin Center, Sheriff Hardwick, Sheriff Leeper, Chief Thomas, the long name, Kachalovich, thank you. Commander Snyder, Commander Layson, Carrie Gaynor from the State Attorney's Office, Jody Phillips, and Tracy Polson, City of Jacksonville. So often society thinks of law enforcement in relation to offenders. We envision handcuffs in interview rooms and jail cells. But a law enforcement officer plays a vital role in advocating for crime survivors and preventing future victimization. Perhaps in no field of law enforcement is it truer than the enforcement and prevention of domestic violence. For so long, domestic abuse was considered a familial issue, and today we recognize it for what it is, inexcusable violence for which there must be accountability and no excuse. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office commits to serve survivors of domestic violence, first and foremost, in a way that is victim-centered and trauma-informed. Our agency fundamentally believes that empowering survivors is as critical as bringing offenders to justice. In this spirit, JSO created the Intimate Violence Enhanced Services Team, or INVEST. INVEST was created as a multidisciplinary team to work intensively with families who are identified to be at greatest risk of severe injury or death due to domestic violence. The INVEST team members receive police reports on acts of domestic violence that occur in Jacksonville. Likewise, INVEST members also receive referrals from domestic violence collaborative service agencies. INVEST team members consist of personnel from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, Hubbard House, and the City of Jacksonville. They provide enhanced response, intensive support, and strengthened follow-up investigation of high risk for fatality domestic violence cases. From October 2022 to September 2023, INVEST team members reviewed 9,380 reports of domestic violence, far too many. 769 of those reports were deemed to have a significant threat of lethality. All those 769 survivors were offered services, and of those, 140 survivors accepted INVEST services. The multidisciplinary wraparound services that INVEST offers are highly effective. Since the INVEST program's launch, there have been no reported domestic homicides of survivors who have accepted services from INVEST. Additionally, to ensure that response to survivors is consistent with best practices, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office expanded survivor-centered education to all officers. Today, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office trains all patrol officers, not just investigators, who specialize in domestic violence, on trauma-informed victim interviewing. Patrol officers responding to calls for service are typically the first contact with law enforcement that survivors have. Officers who are educated on survivor trauma and the domestic violence cycle not only put together better investigations, they provide a stronger foundation for a survivor-centered journey through the criminal justice system. By holding domestic abusers accountable and linking survivors to services, we can reduce the threat of lethality. Holding abusers accountable is critically important to ending domestic violence. But as advocates, our officers will always prioritize physical and emotional needs of the survivors that we serve above all else. I am proud that the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office partners with other organizations and agencies to work collaboratively to empower survivors and hold offenders accountable. Jacksonville is blessed to have the resource of the Hubbard House. Without the committed advocates and service providers at Hubbard House, our agency simply could not support survivors of domestic violence in the holistic way necessary to end the cycle of violence. Likewise, without our valued partners at the State Attorney's Office, who understand the potential lethality of domestic violence, we could not hold abusers accountable for their actions. I want all domestic violence survivors to know that our local law enforcement community recognizes your dignity and commits to stand with you throughout the criminal justice process. We strive to play an important role in your healing. Partner together, survivors and law enforcement advocates will promote a culture of accountability that champions survivors. Now, the City of Jacksonville's Domestic Violence Awareness Month proclamation will be delivered. Let me see. Tracy Polson, would you come up, please? Thank you.
Good morning. It is my honor to deliver this on behalf of our mayor, Donna Deegan. Whereas domestic violence does not affect just one group of people, it is a crime that harms individuals of all races, genders, ages, and socioeconomic levels. Whereas 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence in their lifetime, an average of 8,000 incidents are reported in Duval County each year. And whereas domestic violence places an immense burden on its survivors with impacts that can be felt physically, financially, and psychologically, it is imperative to support survivors of domestic violence as they recover and regain their autonomy and sense of safety. And whereas the perpetrators of those crimes should be held accountable, and the public should be educated on breaking the cycles of abuse. And whereas Hubbard House Incorporated provides life-saving resources to more than 4,000 survivors of domestic violence every year through a variety of free services to adults and children, all working to support the safety and empowerment of survivors of domestic violence. Now, therefore, I, Donna Deegan, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of Jacksonville, Florida, do hereby proclaim October 2023 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in Jacksonville, and encourage all citizens to recognize the vital role Hubbard House plays in serving vulnerable citizens and join them in working to eliminate domestic violence and encourage healthy relationships. Thank you very much.
Next, ASA Carrie Gaynor.
Definitely not meant for my height. Good morning. My name is Carrie Gaynor. I serve as the Deputy Director of the Special Victims Unit at the State Attorney's Office. This year marks the 26th year that this diverse and dedicated community has worked together as part of the Duval County Domestic Violence Fatality Review. We at the State Attorney's Office have been fortunate to work with excellent partners like Hubbard House, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, the Attorney General's Office, the Clerk of Courts and Family Court Services, the First Coast Child Protection Team, Jacksonville Area Legal Aid Incorporated, Battered Women's Justice Project, Jacksonville Safety First Jewish Families and Community Services, the Salvation Army, the United States Navy, and the University of North Florida as part of the annual Domestic Fatality Review. We collectively meet during the first half of the year to review and analyze adult domestic violence homicides within Duval County from the prior year, and the entire team provides findings and recommendations. I have the honor to serve as the meeting coordinator and assist the group in editing of each of the individual reports. Today, I would like to share with you some of those findings. This year, our team of professionals reviewed 14 cases of domestic homicide that included 17 homicide victims, deaths, and 2 suspect deaths in homicide-suicide cases, and 3 that were ultimately determined to be justifiable homicide cases. Some of the patterns. As with prior years, with the data going back to 1997, suspects are still largely male. Of all domestic cases reviewed for 2022, 64% involved male suspects. Although this proportion is down from prior years, this statistic still tracks the overall rate from 1997 to 2022, with 63% of domestic homicides over that period of time being perpetrated by male suspects. This trend continues to show an overwhelming disparity, and that women remain extremely vulnerable and are often the primary target in domestic violence situations. As with previous years, again, firearms remain the primary weapon in domestic violence homicides. This year, firearms were the method of homicide for 71% of the cases, which is slightly up from last year's numbers. From the data between 97 and 2022, the trend is even more stark, as firearms during that period accounted for 59% of domestic homicides. Thus, abusers who have access to firearms remain a significant threat to their potential victims, and it is even more true now. Consequently, when domestic violence victims come forward, it is extremely important that lethality assessments and safety planning be thoroughly discussed. Of note, this year's domestic homicides, where the suspect and victim had a documented history of prior domestic violence between them, that accounted for 55% of the cases we reviewed. If we include cases where suspects had a prior domestic violence history against another domestic partner other than the victim, then that brings the total up to 73% of domestic violence homicides in 2022. These statistics hit home for law enforcement and prosecutors alike. There is always room to advance the cause of justice and to engage with victims of domestic violence, offering services, education, shelter, and whatever else is within our power to offer before they become homicide victims. For 2022, our team of professionals reviewed those 14 domestic homicide cases, and for 2021, we reviewed 17 cases. Although the pure numbers may not be a significant statistical difference, each of these cases involved a human life. For that reason alone, each of these cases is significant. I must reiterate from all prior years that the goal of reaching 0 domestic homicides may not seem plausible, but it is nonetheless something that we should strive for and a meaningful goal. Members of law enforcement, the state attorney's office, and our community partners have chosen a life of service, of honor, of duty, and of commitment to the citizens of Duval County. And our calling is to pursue justice always, to defend the defenseless and protect victims of domestic violence. But we cannot achieve this alone. We call on our Jacksonville-Duval County community to action and vigilance in pursuing abusers. No one deserves to be abused, and our citizens need to look out for one another. Recognizing that what we perceive as casual violence, like shoving and slaps in public, may be more behind closed doors. If you see something, say something. Be a shoulder and an ear for victims, and when in need, help them find their voice. Even be their voice. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Dr. Gail Patton, Chief Executive Officer of Hubbard House.
Good afternoon. I'm joined here today by the CEOs of our partner centers, Ellen Seiler with Quigley House, Kelly Franklin with Betty Griffin Center, and Tracy Fossil with Micah's Place. Each year in October, we launch Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We could do that alone, each in our respective counties. We choose, however, instead to come together. We do this because domestic violence is not a private matter or a family matter. It's a community matter. Survivors in Clay County, we see you. Survivors in Nassau County, we hear you. Survivors in St. Johns County, we stand with you. Survivors in Baker County, we believe you. And survivors in Duval County, we support you. For anyone who hasn't experienced domestic violence, these messages may seem simple. But for survivors, they are some of the most important words to hear. Survivor, listen. You are seen, you are heard, you are supported, you are believed. And you can be safe. The path to safety may not be easy. Abusers control their partner's money. Abusers manipulate their partners into believing the abuse is their fault. Abusers threaten to harm their partner if she leaves or harm those who would help her escape. Abusers take lives. 2 of the local domestic violence homicide cases in 2022 involved murder-suicides. Abusers who took their own lives after they took the lives of their partners. One case, just one case, had 3 victims. A woman's boyfriend killed her and also her 2 adult siblings. One homicide victim was 4 months pregnant when her abuser killed her, with their 2 young children still in the home at the time. To anyone living in abuse, we know that journey to safety can be hard, but your life may truly depend on it. And if you can't see a path to safety in this moment, organizations like Hubbard House, the Betty Griffin Center, Micah's Place, and Quigley's House are here to light the way. It's why we are launching Hubbard House's Domestic Violence Awareness Month campaign, A Brighter Day. A brighter day is when a survivor sees their strength, because people, let me tell you, survivors are some of the strongest people you'll ever meet in your life. A brighter day is when a survivor feels hope. And a safer day is a brighter day. And you, our community, can help light the flame as well. Share our posts on social media. Maybe you don't know anyone who needs help. Or maybe you do, but you just don't know it because they haven't come forward. Maybe that post you share that has our hotline number that shows survivors how they can access services, maybe that will save their lives. I also hope you will join Hubbard House on October 20th, which we are calling A Brighter Day. I encourage everyone to wear bright colors, share photos, and flood social media timelines with brightness, hope, and of course, support. Survivor, we know the brighter day may not be easy, but you are not alone. Whether it's Hubbard House in Duval and Baker counties, Betty Griffin Center in St. John's, Micah's Place in Nassau County, or Quigley House in Clay County, we are here to help your light shine because you do have a light. And that's something I want you to hear in a survivor's own words. The survivor we're going to hear from, Melissa, endured abuse for years. But here today, she shines so bright. She is a passionate supporter of survivors and advocates for those in need in our community overall. I now invite her up to tell you her story. Melissa?
So I met my abuser when I was 17 years old, and he appeared very normal. We came from 2 very different family backgrounds. My family's very close. We talk every day. We show love openly. And his family had a history of violence, verbal and emotional abuse. He told me stories that shocked me, stories that I could not imagine. Fighting with irons that you iron with, kitchen chairs, threats with guns, all witnessed by children, including him. I didn't see that side of him for a long time until one night before we were married. I was asleep in an apartment that I shared with some girlfriends, and I was awakened from a deep sleep by him grabbing my arms and butting my head against his head full force. I was in so much shock, but he was so apologetic. He offered no explanation, but he was apologetic. I thought it was the result of his difficult upbringing, and I was certain that it would never happen again. It did. You wouldn't have guessed what was happening if you knew me then. We presented in public as the nice, normal couple. We were happy, active in church, involved with our family and friends. We were helpful to those people that were around us in need because we were the great pretenders. But at home, he was escalating. One night, I was trying to ignore his verbal attacks by pretending to be asleep. He proceeded to kick me in the back and the spine, violently, repeatedly, with both feet, until I was completely off the bed and onto the floor. He told me that he was in control of if, when, and where I would sleep. One of his go-to moves was physically restraining me. He would sit on my chest and pin my arms down with his legs and then attack my head because the marks don't show on your head. Sometimes the violence was so bad that I had to go to the doctor. But I would go to different doctors because I didn't want anybody to catch on and ask me about my repeated injuries. Being the closest person to me, he was fully aware of my nature and my personality to want to please others and make life easier for others. I want to fix things. He exploited these personal feelings and used them against me to keep me quiet and to protect his abusive behavior. I covered for him, and he would use that as a tool against me. He would say, "No one will believe you if you tell them or if you try to leave me because you have covered for me so well." And I believed him. One day, after being married about 13 years, my ex wanted me to make him some lunch. I heated up some soup and delivered it to him in the living room. He wasn't pleased with the meal, and he sent the soup bowl and the milk glass both flying at me. Hot soup went all over. The heavy soup bowl busted my thigh muscle. Glass was everywhere. I was trying to clean it up when our almost 2-year-old came into the room. I continued cleaning it up, making up a story that Mommy dropped the soup bowl. I realized then that my son could not grow up in this. I could not continue to cry through the pain and through the tears and the lies. A few months later, there was another incident, and the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office came to our home. I don't even remember why they were called or who called them because it was a traumatic night. The JSO told me that I should go to the Hubbard House, and they brought me there. Sitting with a Hubbard House advocate, it was the first time I ever told anybody about the violence. I don't think I would have been able to tell and speak to anyone that I personally knew at that time because I was afraid I'd be a burden. But after I visited the Hubbard House, I was able to start opening up to my family and friends. I started to see that trying to protect those that we love at the expense of ourselves is not what any of those that we love want us to do. It's not what I wanted for myself, and it's not what I wanted for my son. So I made an escape. I wish I could say that leaving meant safety, but it was still a journey. He stalked me, showed up in public places where he knew I would be, and peeped into my home. We would do our custody exchanges at neutral places after we separated, but even that didn't hold him back. One time he jumped onto the hood of my car and tried to smash through the windshield to get to me with my young son in the back seat. But I persevered. I found safety and I found freedom. I know now that my ex was a liar. He said that people wouldn't believe me. People wouldn't support me, and he lied. My abuser told me that no one would want me because I was so unattractive. No one would want me because I couldn't have biological children. And no one would want me because I have a biracial son that I adopted. He lied. I'm not a failure. I'm not responsible for fixing other people. He was mean and manipulative, and he was a liar. No matter what someone is whispering in your ear or screaming in your face, survivor, you can get out of a violent situation. You can be safe, financially stable. Your kids can be safe. You can have a new life. There is hope. I now have a wonderful marriage. I have 3 kids, 4 grandkids, a rewarding job, I'm blessed to serve others through a local nonprofit that I started. I've been delivered out of a place of sadness and fear and no hope to a place of joy, strength, and hope. It's not just my story. For any survivor who's listening, it can be your story too.
Wow. Thank you for that very much. Thank you all for attending this recognition of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Today's event evidences how many community leaders and advocates we have in Jacksonville who are passionately committed to supporting survivors and ending intimate partner violence. On behalf of all of us in law enforcement and in support services, I want survivors to know that we stand with you. While this Awareness Month occurs only once a year, our pledge to empower and protect you is our daily commitment. Now, I and other speakers are happy to take any questions that you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I would say plan, be safe, and definitely reach out to an agency when you feel comfortable. And know that your abuser is lying to you. It's so hard to understand when you're in this situation.
harm to themselves in a way. And I'm quoting a case that I heard recently came, and they both were in a fight, but he was obviously abusive. Not just afraid, but they just go to the extent of taking blame for something.
I think I stayed for a long time because I was taking the blame also, not to that extent, but I didn't want to burden anyone or hurt any of my family members by letting them know what I'd been hiding. And so I think that the most important thing for me is to understand again that the person is lying to you, and it's so hard when you're in this situation to understand that that person is telling you lies because you believe it and your self-esteem takes that hit and you think it's your fault, and it's not. And so I think I would really want to tell that person that it's not your fault and that you can be safe. You hear all the lies about the financial stability, which you spoke to, and I think that you believe it. You believe that you're going to lose your children. You believe that you're going to lose your home. And I don't think that you understand that there's people out there and agencies like the Hubbard House and other agencies that can help you be established again.
All right, so, hey, Janice, go ahead.
For me, I think that I didn't pay as much attention to the family dynamics inside of their home and the difference. Not that different dynamics and personalities can't make things work, but I don't think that I personally paid enough attention to the dynamics inside of their home, and I didn't believe the stories because they were so outlandish to me, something I could never imagine. And so I think that if I would have listened to that, I don't think I could stop his abuse. I think wherever he was going to do that. But I think that for me, I should have just noticed that a little more.
Other red flags that might be available or might be in relationships like this, or is when you're seeing somebody is very controlling of the other partner, controlling everything that they do, extreme jealousy, where they don't want them to go anywhere or do anything without them. Also, other forms of abuse that people might not categorized as abuse, but physically holding somebody down, you talked about that in your story, or pushing somebody or shoving people. Sometimes survivors may brush that off, but that obviously is a sign of abuse because it actually is abuse. And then somebody who is really trying to isolate their partner from everybody else, because if somebody has support, if they're telling everybody what's going on in their home, then that person has an opportunity to get out of the relationship sooner. So that extreme isolation is also a red flag.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming out, and let's remember this month, let's remember this year round, and I appreciate you very much.